Okay, so I probably still sound kind of sick, but I'm gonna try to get through this anyway and hopefully be understandable. So, I was gonna make a video about what I'm calling the label effect, but I realized that this could go hand in hand with the how to know if you have mitochondrial dysfunction and even like brain damage, neurological issues, really. So, label is a mix between the word Leviathan, which is one of the spirits in quote unquote narcissism, and then Jezebel. And it's kind of a funny backstory because when my health really started to go downhill from the iatrogenics and other things, well, really mainly the iatrogenics, and then that led to other issues. And I was staying in my sister's house with some other relatives. I started to get even more weird symptoms. Aside from the whole not being able to digest food anymore, which I was gaslit about for a really long time, which I talk about in some of the other videos, I think. I also started to have, I don't know, I was just calling them throat sicknesses, and I mentioned this before, and I know it sounds weird, but that's just what I was calling it, because my throat would be dry, and then I would get a fever, and then it would be red and stuff, and what else was it? My nose would be running, things like that. And I thought for a while that it just had something to do with the tonsil infection that I had been forced to walk around with for years and really needed surgery for. But even after finally getting the surgery, which took a lot of fear tactics for me to be able to finally get, I still was having this. And I now know that it's actually because of pretty much being allergic to buildings or houses and the chemicals. And there's that part, but there's also the fact that there was poor air quality. There's poor air quality in honestly a lot of houses or apartments. And then there was, of course, mold, which in the U.S., mold is kind of unavoidable because we build with wood. And the buildings, well, not the buildings, but the wood has mold before it even leaves the lumber yard. So there was mold toxicity and carbon monoxide toxicity, which some people had actually came out and tested the house and told us that. And it's actually kind of funny because I do think that throughout the whole, well, not throughout the whole thing, but once I started to get sicker, I should say, my mom was I think she mentioned the mold once or a couple times, but of course that was just overlooked. And then this was in GA, so this was a place where doctors, they would finally actually question things and say stuff about things, but of course they didn't do anything. But it was so different than when I was in North Carolina and doctors never really said anything about anything. So this is where the same place where the doctors had finally asked why I was 80 pounds, which I had been 80 pounds for years. And of course they weren't really that invested in figuring out why, because I still am. But I found out I of course still have metabolic issues from the iatrogenics, and I couldn't digest food, which I don't have that issue anymore really. But I also take digestive enzymes, and I also fixed my gut dysbiosis a year or two ago, or at least since running away. So yeah, a year or two ago, I guess. I found ways to do that, because not only could I not digest food, but that actually caused a buildup in bacteria and all types of issues where it just constantly felt like there was wars and disputes and domestic disputes and civil rights marches going on in my stomach between the bacteria. But I was able to fix that with animal meds pretty much, because that's the one thing that really worked. And I know people will be like, well, there's cloves and wormwood. And I mean, yeah, I was doing that, but that didn't really have the same effects, and it definitely wasn't working as fast as the animal meds worked. But the point I'm getting at with that is that, as I mentioned in a couple of these videos, these are the same doctors that came to the conclusion that I was just being starved at home, and also there was like a lot of molestation accusations. But when doctors can't do that, they just accuse you of sleeping around, which I don't even know what that has to do with, like, really 99% of the things that I had going on or have going on. But anywho, I don't like doctors anyway, and I've been curing myself, and I've been working on doing that kind of since 12, but I couldn't really cure myself from the iatrogenics till after I was no longer on the drug, so really 14. And I've been able to work on that more since getting out of that whole situation. But yeah. And the doctors didn't really care about the whole mold thing, because mainstream medical system, they don't care about mold toxicity and all that stuff. They don't even really believe in any of that stuff. Same way in the Western world as a whole, or at least really the U.S., they try to act like parasites and bacterial overgrowths aren't real, and whenever somebody does mention any of those things, you're taught to think, oh, they're just quote-unquote schizophrenic and stuff like that. And I remember there's even a lot of people, at least in support groups that I would be in, asking medical questions. There was a lot of people that found it hard to believe that I was or had been 80 pounds and that doctors didn't and won't do anything, but I don't really know what people expect them to do, to be truthfully honest. They don't cure anybody, so I don't really know what people expect. But yeah, what point was I supposed to be getting at? Oh yeah, so back to the house thing. So there was also a lot of things with the abuse situation, of course, where my mom would have the house on 80, 90 degrees, and it wasn't even her house. And that's what happens when the demons in people want them to torment people. And it was really bad for obvious reasons, because for one, that's too hot for a house to be, but also due to the metabolic issues and the leftover brain damage from the iatrogenics, but especially the metabolic issues and the blood sugar stuff, my body temperature is very unregulated. So when my blood sugar is going down, of course I'm going to get into fever temperatures. And same thing if it's going up, although like I said in another video, I never really have highs. Since I've been more in the type 1 category, not in the type 2 metabolic syndrome category, I have never had my blood sugar checked, and it's been higher than it's supposed to be, but it has been low a lot, especially when I was on the East Coast again from late November to mid-January. I was in the 54s the whole time of me being on the East Coast, because the food out there just has more crap in it and it made me more sick. So yeah, anyway, I was already feeling really, really hot, even when it wasn't that hot. And then of course, recently started having memories about how I was never really allowed to open the windows. When I would open them, my younger sister would come close it, which pretty much they were committing suicide, because there was air pollution from the mold and the carbon monoxide toxicity, and it was just way too hot. So I don't even know how they were doing it. The demons wanted them to torment me, but they were tormenting themselves. Then I would be fighting over a fan. My mom's boyfriend was still my fan, and he had hyperhidrosis too, as he would say, so he would sweat really bad at night. But I now could say that they have metabolic issues too, and I also could say that he definitely has thyroid issues from the research I've been doing. So there was that, and I was never really the person to throw up, but at that point in time, I would just throw up all the time because I was too hot and because of things with building chemicals. And also chemicals and air fresheners, that would make me throw up too. But especially that day, my mom had the house on 90 degrees for Christmas, and then ended up leaving because it was too hot. That's a long story. I actually forgot all about that for a while. But yeah, I was throwing up really, really bad. What else was it? Just waking up and feeling sick. And this is something that I've noticed other times I've stayed in buildings, traditional buildings, by the way. So, like, when I was staying in this quote-unquote host home, not even going to go into that story, I noticed that I was getting sick. Not as sick as I've gotten in some other buildings, like where I'm staying at now, or like when I was with relatives, but I noticed the whole thing where, like, it's easier for me to get up in the morning when I'm staying outside because I wake up and, like, I don't still feel sleepy and the sunlight shining on me, and I just don't feel as sick when I'm staying outside as I do in buildings, pretty much. So, like, I had been saying even before I stayed at the host home in, like, November and a couple months before that honestly I felt like if I just found a good camping spot, it would be easier for me to do things I need to do every day if I was staying outside in a tent, because I can actually get up in the morning. But when I'm staying indoors, I could end up not getting up till like 12 and 1 p.m. because when the sunlight doesn't wake me up, I can sleep longer. But also, I just feel so sick when I'm staying indoors that it's just hard for me to get up because I'm feverish, I'm throwing up. Before the HCL and stuff, well, I was going to say before that I would have diarrhea and throw up even more and have acid reflux all night, but I mean, that happened regardless before I started taking the HCL, so I can't even use that example. But, what else was I going to say? Oh, yeah, when I was in the host home, that's when the whole bladder pain flare-up type thing came back. Although I wasn't really sure if that was a flare-up due to me being allergic to building chemicals, or if that flare-up came because of, like, something I ate. It could have been both, though, but I really don't know. But one thing I did find out is that taking activated charcoal, which is a binder, helps with not just the bladder pain, but pelvic floor pain in general. So that means that issue is most likely due to, like, I don't know, bacterial overgrowth or parasites or something. I'm not really sure which one. There are probably a couple things. I was pretty sure it was due to mold, though, when I first really started to get into research, but now I know a couple things can cause that. But anyway, well, no. I forgot something I really should say. Also, long untreated insulin resistance can cause that from nerve damage due to blood sugar issues and just weakening the pelvic floor. And so anyway, that's kind of a summary. And when I was staying with my relatives, a lot of people thought that, like, the issues I was having were due to, like, the spiritual side of everything. And they were like, it's because of, like, the Leviathan, Jezebel, and the other spirits, or the marine spirits. And I mean, that's possible, but the more research I've done on health and stuff and building chemicals, especially when I took this class, well, these couple of classes on construction and sustainable construction, I realized that honestly, it wasn't as spiritual as I thought it was. And that's another reason why whenever I wasn't at the house, I would feel better, other than, like, the leftover issues from still having to go back to the mold every day and the insulin resistance issues. And, like, my blood work and stuff, so much stuff got better while living outside. And it really just says a lot about the state of our buildings in the U.S. But anyway, the one person that was telling me otherwise about all the health issues I was having, especially while living with relatives, they had Lyme disease, which they're in the fake Euro, can't say the word, but they're in the fake Euro bloodline the ones that like to run around Northeast Africa pretending to be the people. So of course she went through SRA sex trafficking by her relatives. And so the point I'm getting at is that you can get Lyme disease from the spirit of Bel. I think it was Bel, or maybe it was Molech. Honestly, it could even be the Baphomet spirit. I can't even remember which one, to be honest. But, of course, with the spiritual and physical side to abuse and trauma, your body starts to break down. And also, you can develop a lot of issues that could have been curable or could have never happened due to, like, medical neglect. Because the lady also had this theory that she could have, like, got bit by a tick at one point, and it just never got treated, and she never knew or whatever, and then she got Lyme disease and it got worse. But anywho, she was the one person that told me about how my issues did sound pretty autoimmune. And of course, psychotropics cause autoimmune issues because they're made to turn off neurotransmitters that make your body work, which causes a lot of issues. And of course, all drugs are going to give you kidney damage, liver damage, pancreas damage, digestive system issues, which really, that goes back to the pancreatic issues especially, because the pancreas plays a huge role in digestion. The most the stomach really does is like catch the food and break it down with the stomach acid, but everything else is pretty much the pancreas. And there's also the liver and the gallbladder, which like lets out the bile. And I remember once I moved to the West Coast to like help me with laying low and for a couple other reasons, I noticed that I have some of the same issues as the people who are on Fetty and all that stuff, because I mean all drugs are drugs, just like I say in that video I made about the different drugs, and I show people talking about how the U.S. forces people on drugs in childhood and then acts confused when people are overdosing on the side of the road, which is all depopulation and social experiments, by the way. Because, I mean, we all know who's making and selling the drugs, and people try to, like, talk about the Mexicans. I mean, it's the U.S. government and the police, and anybody that's making drugs is an alchemist and sorcerer. So they have to have a lot of knowledge and all those things to really be able to make this stuff. Like, it's not just the average person that can really actually make drugs, regardless of what people try to make it seem like. But anyway, it's all under the little Greek god worship Hippocratic oath bull crap, which they really do contrary to what they say in the oath. But of course, people should know how these deities are and what they really want, but that's a whole nother video. So for the label effect, I wrote, from narcissistic, quote-unquote, or quote-unquote sociopathic abuse. I named some of the spirits that go along with this: Leviathan, the octopus spirit, which is for mind control, Jezebel spirit, Legion, Asmodeus / Lust, etc. spirits. A good couple of these are marine spirits, but there's other ones too. Some symptoms: delayed, stagnated physical development after early puberty, which also goes into like the things that are in the food that cause hormone imbalances, but also the generational marine spirits or other ones that cause hormone imbalances, like high testosterone, or maybe if you're a dude, high estrogen. This is also a big part of the whole thing that was called the Homosexual Manifesto, which honestly, it's really like the Willie Lynch letter, but for everybody instead of certain people. Which I've mentioned this a couple times before, I think on this channel. I'm pretty sure I have. Maybe not as much as on some other channels, but metabolic issues, which also goes along with the iatrogenics. If you go through castrate system abuse where you're forced on the different psychotropics. Severely underweight until your 20s. And I didn't even, well, I'm not even in my 20s anyway, but when I wrote this, I was more so thinking about my older siblings because, of course, they went through all types of abuse and Jezebelic abuse, and they were severely underweight, and they didn't even become normal weights until they were in like their mid to late 20s. And one of them really never did, but I think that's because of like the leftover iatrogenic issues. So yeah, my older siblings on my mom's side used to be known for being skinny, and some people would make fun of them for it. I remember this one dude, he said people used to call them the reindeer siblings or something, which doesn't really make that much sense to me, but they're pretty much just known for being skinny or being overweight, which of course being underweight and overweight is actually caused by the same things. Insulin resistance, not eating enough, which the insulin resistance and the pancreatic issues can actually come from not eating enough because overweight people are actually malnourished. And the people I've known who are overweight always never really eating when they do eat. It's like highly processed food or fast food, which of course causes a fatty liver and fatty pancreas. These things that you'll never be able to get tested for, so you'll never know you actually have. Blood sugar issues, which aside from the trauma causes DPDR. And I talked about in some of the other videos about how to know if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, that what you may think is dissociation could really just be seizures from the insulin resistance, but of course you're never going to get told that. Another thing with the blood sugar issues is mood swings, multiple personalities, also from the trauma. Feelings of impending doom or losing your mind, which is from your blood sugar dropping, and also the parasites and bacterial overgrowth. Indigestion, which is the inability to digest food. Yet when you do have indigestion, you're taught from the mainstream medical system to take some over-the-counter PPIs or proton pump inhibitors to take away your stomach acid, which actually will cause more issues. Spine pain and spine issues, which is from the Leviathan spirit, which is why you'll notice that people who've been through quote-unquote narcissistic or sociopathic abuse commonly have generational scoliosis and things like that. Cysts and lumps in the spine or really anywhere. And I could also even say cancer, which cancer is actually a metabolic issue as well. This is common for people that have been through Leviathan abuse and don't get out and things like that. Bacterial overgrowths and parasites, which can also come from the insulin resistance and the inability to digest food, which I mean, you're going to have parasites regardless, but you're taught otherwise in the Western world, but everybody has them, which is why in other countries they do cleanses once or twice a year. But insulin resistance or diabetes can cause SIBO and other things like that. And then this one is really weird, but this is apparently common in certain autoimmune conditions, being in more pain when you're not moving. And this was something that was really weird for me because I noticed that like if I'm sitting still, especially if I'm inside a building or really a house or apartment, they seem to have more chemicals or something, I don't know, than like stores for whatever reason. But when I'm not moving, like the symptoms worsen and I get really feverish and I get like I just will be in a lot of pain. But when I start moving around, then I'm fine, or at least I'm fine enough. And this is separate from the pelvic floor pain because with that I couldn't do jack. Oh yeah, something that I forgot to mention with the quote-unquote throat sicknesses that would also get me in trouble a lot, even though I help pay bills, is that the only thing that would really help with my throat swelling and my nose and throat being dry, and even with like the fever symptoms, is taking a shower. The cold ones helped more, at least for the high temperatures, not for the throat issues, but it's just kind of uncomfortable. But the hot showers and the humidity from that really help with the throat issues, so I would just like take showers a lot when I was able to. And something else to keep in mind is that your body temperature is raising because your body is trying to burn out some infection, so it's trying to kill something or you. So back to houses and illnesses: dry air, no oxygen, and extremely hot. This also goes along with the fact that, especially in low income or trailer parks, what else? And new type buildings, there's not a lot of airflow, and there's commonly an issue with no HVAC systems or HVAC systems that don't function properly. And one thing that I learned with studying construction is that there's supposed to be a certain amount of air changes per hour to keep like the air clean, so you're not like breathing in a whole bunch of polluted air and carbon dioxide or whatever in the world. But that actually, I don't believe that's happening in a lot of buildings. And another thing that also goes along with this is people forgetting to like clean out, or not forgetting to, people not even knowing that you're supposed to clean the dust out of your vents. A lot of people don't know to do that, and they don't really see why that's important, or they're not able to, and like some maintenance person is supposed to come do it, but they won't. But that's actually really dangerous to not do. If I'm remembering correctly, a room in a residential house, or well, a residential building, which would be a house or apartment, is supposed to have like 35 or more air changes per hour. It was something like that. And that's by code and law. And so anyway, when you're not breathing in fresh oxygen, which that's how it's going to be if you're living in a house or an apartment, or if you're in any building a lot. Because inside of buildings, that's where the most toxic air is. The air inside of buildings is more toxic than the air outside. And what that does is that the mold and the carbon dioxide or monoxide, whichever one it is, poison, kills cells in mitochondria. And your cells are pretty much dying because they can't breathe, they're not getting enough oxygen. And places where you can't open windows, that makes it worse. There are buildings with no windows. So if you're in the Freemason Lodge doing Luciferian rituals all day, you're dying. And going back to the whole throat sicknesses thing, something that I mentioned a couple times before, especially since the evidence channels, is that most people in GA, male or female, have been molested by their mom, their dad, a family friend, some other relative, some neighbor. And so due to that, a lot of the kids are hypersexual. This also went into the whole thing with like the constant either molestation or sleeping around accusations that I would get revolving around the pelvic floor pains, but also why my throat was like getting swollen and stuff. But there's also the fact that whenever you're a female, doctors are always going to accuse you of sleeping around. And of course, while they said that they felt like I was just getting starved and molested at home, which I wasn't getting molested at home, but they said that. And of course they didn't care, so that went how that went. I've actually been coming to the conclusion that my body is too alkaline, which I might have mentioned in the last video about mitochondrial dysfunction. Because I was mentioning how I was accidentally lying to everybody because I got high pH and low pH mixed up. And so I already know that my urine is alkaline. But then I was watching this video. They were talking about some of the symptoms of alkalinity all over the body. Now, I don't know about my blood, but what the dude was saying about if your mouth is too alkaline, I definitely had a lot of those symptoms. So like I guess the tonsil infection probably, I think that has something to do with like alkalinity. I also believe that had a lot to do with like, maybe like the poor digestion and like acid reflux and things just coming back up. Gingivitis, I think also cavities. But I also have always felt like the cavities was more so due to like my body trying to strip calcium from my teeth and stuff, and pretty much the malnutrition from poor digestion, which I haven't had cavities in like a long time, but pretty much when I moved in with my mom again, that last time there was this whole situation where I went to the dentist for the first time in a long time and found out that I actually had a cavity in all of my teeth for who knows how long apparently. And I had never had a cavity before, but once I started doing research after running away, I realized why I had a cavity in every tooth for the first time ever. What point was I getting at? Oh yeah, but alkaline mouth can also cause cavities and gingivitis and gums receding and things like that. And of course I already know that my stomach is alkaline, which is why I had the low stomach acid. But I believe that's due to many things. And commonly bacterial overgrowth and parasites cause your body to become too alkaline. To go back to the list, blood sugar issues and brain damage cause body temperature dysregulation. And poor body temperature control or regulation, which I forgot, like what part of the body actually did this. I can't even remember, but it's like something in the brain. I can't remember, but I used to mention it when I would like talk about psychotropic side effects. But this is from leftover issues from the brain damage from psychotropics. So iatrogenic injury, the same way that serotonin syndrome causes your temperature to go really high, but now it's permanent because of the leftover brain damage. And the leftover iatrogenic insulin resistance and metabolic issues make this worse. And one way to know if you have this is if you like have to constantly take a jacket on and off. Like you have the jacket, you have it on and then you're hot, then you take it off and then you're cold, then you put it on again and you're hot all over again. And if you're older and you have symptoms like this from insulin resistance or brain damage and hormonal issues from the insulin resistance or even thyroid issues, you may get told that you're just going through menopause, but that may not be true. Another symptom of being allergic to building chemicals that I forgot, which could also have something to do with die-off effect / Herxheimer, is loss of appetite. As someone who knew for a fact that I totally had to have leptin resistance since the first time I heard about it, and finally was actually able to like get tested for it, because as I mentioned before in some other videos, it's actually really easy to go into Quest and like get testing done through walk-in labs. You don't even have to really use your real name or age. You could find a lot of ways to get around this, but of course you have to have the money for it. And I remember at one point when I was in places where busking actually worked, I would busk, and I would do that just to like save up money for blood tests I wanted. And so anyway, when I first heard about leptin resistance, I wanted to get the test done, and I finally was able to. And of course I definitely have leptin resistance, which goes on with insulin resistance. And this is one of the things that causes people to like constantly eat all the time. I also believe it goes along with nerve damage. But overall, when you have metabolic issues, you're starving on a cellular level. So in your body's mind, you're starving. And so leptin resistance goes along with all of that. And it makes you just constantly hungry and constantly eat. Or even I'll have this thing where I don't necessarily feel hungry, but I can't stop eating anyway. But I noticed that even with that symptom, whenever I'm inside of a house or apartment, I lose my appetite. And I think this has something to do with the allergies to building chemicals. Because any other time, I really can't stop eating. It reminds me of this post I seen when I used to be on Instagram years and years ago. And it was like, I'm on a seafood diet, I seafood and then I eat it. But that really is how it is for me. But for whatever reason, when I'm in a house or an apartment, like I lose my appetite pretty much, and it's really hard to eat because of, I'm assuming, the allergies to building chemicals, which makes me lose my appetite, even with the leptin resistance, which makes it really hard for somebody to not eat all day constantly. But yeah, so loss of appetite, fevers, dry throat, which I think also has a lot to do with my body not being able to keep in moisture in general. So pretty much it's like having a fever, high temperatures, not really being able to eat, and yeah. And what else was I going to say? Oh yeah, you also know if you have metabolic issues, if you can eat all day but it's really hard to get yourself to drink anything. Which is really bad because when your kidneys are kind of struggling, you have parasites or bacterial overgrowth, you're going to be really dehydrated anyway.